Lesson 1.3 and 1.4. We're looking at all of the properties. I suggest you pause and write down this chart. Now there's going to be more of it down to the bottom, but not much more. So I'm going to give you an example of what each one looks like with numbers in it. The reflexive property would look like 6 equals 6, or 3x equals 3x. It has to be the exact same thing on both sides. Now the symmetric reverses each side. So say if you have a problem where x equals 3, symmetric says if x equals 3, then 3 equals x. You take the left side, switch it with the right side. Now transitive is about going from A to B and then B to C. So if, for example, if 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 4 equals 3 plus 1, then you can squash the two 4's in the middle and say 2 plus 2 equals 3 plus 1. So if one thing is equal to another, and then a third thing is equal to one of those, then the 2/3 are equal to each other. Now substitution. Substitution is about replacing something. If one thing is equal to another, it can be replaced. Like, let's say x equals 5 plus 3. What's something that's equal to 5 plus 3? Right, x. So replacing 5 plus 3 with an 8, that's substitution. Turning something that's equal into something else. Additive identity. Anytime you add 0, whether it be to a number like 5, 5 plus 0 is 5. Negative 3x plus 0 is negative 3x. Anytime you add 0, you don't change the problem. I'll move up. Additive inverse. If you take two numbers that are opposites, they'll always add up to 0. 7 plus negative 7 equals 0. Negative 3 plus 3, that equals 0. That's the additive inverse. Now the multiplicative identity says you can times anything you want by 1 and still get the same number. 13 times 1 is 13. Negative 5x times 1 is negative 5x. You can always multiply by 1. The multiplicative inverse puts two reciprocals equal to times each other equal to 1. So 2/3 times 3 over 2 equals 1. Negative 2 over 5 equals negative 5 over 2. See how they're reciprocals? That will always equal 1. Now hopefully the most known one is the multiplicative property of 0. You can always multiply by 0 and you always get the same thing. 7 times 0, 0. Negative 4x times 0, 0. Anything times 0 is always going to be a 0. Now commutative property is about changing the order. Now everyone knows that 3 plus 6 is equal to 6 plus 3 because they both equal 9. And the same is true with multiplication. 4 times 3 is equal to 12, and so is 3 times 4. That's the commutative property. Associative is about saying if you're going to add three things, it doesn't matter what order you add them in. For example, 2 plus 3 makes 5. Add that to 4, you're still going to get 9. But if you were to add the 3 and the 4 first, that would be 7 plus 2 is still 9. That doesn't change the answer. That's associative. And it works for multiplying. 3 times 2, put in a parentheses, times 4. 3 times 2 is 6, times 4 is 24. But say you don't want to multiply those together first. 3 times 4 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. That's the associative. And lastly, distributive. Distributive is when you have a number outside the parentheses, for example. And then you have to times everything by what's inside the parentheses. 2 times x, 2x. 2 times 4, 8. That's the distributive property. Now, those are all the properties that you need to know. Now, on the next slide, I put one big matching problem so that you would know what the quiz will look like, which is going to be one big matching problem. So, you should pause, copy all this down, and then see if you can match up which ones go with what. Okay, so now that you've tried all of these and tried the best you could, remember, it's not about what you know, which ones you can figure out, but which ones you can figure out it's not, so that you can narrow it down. You should always start with whichever one you think is the easiest. Now, for some people, that could be the distributive property. So they look for the one with the parentheses. So that's going to make C be distributive. Now, some people may look for the multiply by 0 property. Oh, look, J, multiplying by 0. So go over here and find the multiplication property of 0. One of them that wasn't on the last page is multiplying by -1. So you come over here, it says multiply by -1. So that's going to be E. Another property, adding 0, gives you the same thing. So that's the additive identity. Multiplying by 1, that would be the multiplicative identity. Now if you switch the order, 3x and x3, that's commutative for multiplication. Now the other commutative will be where it switches with addition. 10b plus 12b, 12b plus 10b. So that's the commutative for addition. So that leaves associative and multiplicative inverse. Well, associative moves parentheses. This one's got parentheses and it moves, and it's got pluses in it. So that must be the associative for addition. Down here, I've got parentheses. See how the parentheses are around the 25 and the 0.5? Over here, they're around the 25 and the 0.6. So that must be the associative for multiplication. And then the last one, 5 and 1/5 are reciprocals. That's why this one is F. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Here's a math problem. We need to be able to solve it and then name the properties that we used. Okay? Now, if I was going to solve 2a minus 6 equals 4, the first thing I would do would be to add 6 to both sides. Now, if you add 6 to both sides, that's the addition property of equality. Now, you normally don't have to write out the whole thing. Most people just write addition property. Now, that's adding the 6. I didn't actually add the 6. Now, you know if you have a -6 and a +6, they cancel out. There's a property that says a -6 and a +6 cancel out. That would be the additive inverse. Now there's another property that says 4 plus 6 equals 10. Is 4 and 6 equal to 10? If they're both equal to the same thing, then that's substitution. All right, so the 6's are gone. I added 6 and got 10. I use substitution. Now, the next one, there's a 2 in front of x. You got to get rid of that 2. I'm going to divide by it. Guess what that's called? The division property of equality. Now, actually dividing by 2 and just getting x's, 2 divided by 2 is actually 1. Dividing by two things and getting 1 is actually the multiplicative inverse. Because dividing is really multiplying. And if you multiply or divide and get 1, that's always going to be the multiplicative inverse. And over here, 10 divided by 2 is 5. Replacing a 10 and a 2 with a 5, that of course again once is substitution. Now, today it's not important about how to solve the problem. The important thing is what steps we used. Most of you should be able to solve a two-step problem. If not, hopefully this will refresh your memory. The important part that we're doing is the properties. All right, let's look at B. So if you notice, there's a negative 2 that's dividing half my problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is multiply to stop the dividing by negative 2. And again, if you multiply on both sides, that's the multiplication property. Of equality. Now, actually crossing out those two negative 2's, because a negative 2 divided by a negative 2 is 1. Crossing out two things and making a 1 is the multiplicative. That's right, inverse. But changing 15 and negative 2 into what they're equal to, which is negative 30, is good. Substitution. Now there's only one more step to this problem. That plus 1's got to go. So minus 1 on both sides. That would be the subtraction property of equality. One and negative 1 cancel out. Guess what property says you can add a 1 and a negative 1 and get 0? The additive. Good. Inverse. And then negative 30 minus 1 more is negative 31. Substitution. Okay? All right, last one to look at. All right, see if you can name the properties for this one. Oh, and I almost forgot. Every problem starts out with a property. And when you start with a problem, it's because I gave it to you. So always the first property is given. So the first thing you write down is always going to be given. Now, if you don't know what to do to this problem, you're going to add 4. So pick a property for that. When you're done with that, You're going to cross out the 4's, and then you're going to add the 4 with the 29. So adding 4 is the addition property of equality. Actually crossing out these 4's, additive inverse. Good. And then doing 29 and 4 makes 33. Substitution again. How do we get rid of that 11? We divide by it. Division property of equality. Everybody likes to cross out their 11's. Crossing them out is the multiplicative inverse. Very good. And 33 divided by 11 is 3. Substitution. All right, I only got time for one more. So here's the last one. Go ahead, pause, see if you can do it yourself. Don't forget to start with your given. Multiply by 8. That's going to be a property. Crossing out the 8's. That's going to be a property. Multiplying these two together. That's going to be a property. If you still don't get it, try to fill those in. Multiplication property. Of equality. Crossing out your 8's. Multiplicative inverse. Actually doing 5 times 8, turning it into a 40. Substitution. Now you've got 3 more steps. Minus 7 from both sides, that's a property. Crossing out the 7's, that's a property. Actually subtracting 7, that's a property. Fill it in. So minusing 7, that would be the subtraction property of equality. Crossing out your 7's, a positive and a negative make 0. Additive inverse. And 40 minus 7 equals 33. Substitution. So n is 33. And that again is a review of the properties. Now I have on the last slide the work I'd like you to try to do. So over on the left side is matching. Use the words from the notes you took. And then in 13 and 14, the problem is already worked out. You just have to identify what property was used each time. So go ahead and pause here, complete the work, and then turn it in when you're done.